Welcome to Arts First, the podcast that stands up for freedom of expression in the arts and art for art's sake. Today's episode is all about the Spanish Gallery, which is part of the Auckland project, a unique and inspiring museum project in the north of England. If you've listened to previous episodes of Arts First, you'll know that we're greatly concerned about the fate and direction of many of our museums. We discussed Tate Director Maria Balshaw's book Gathering of Strangers and her vision for repurposing museums around issues such as social inclusion, decolonisation, environmental activism and so on, over and above the fundamentals of art and conservation. And in JJ Charlesworth's conversation with Professor Frank Furedi on his book The War on the Past, they explored why our museum collections and in fact the whole tradition of European art has come to be seen as problematic. And we're seeing now major institutions fighting for their very existence, not due so much to funding issues, but because those in charge seem to place little or no value on their collections. Bosses at University College London look set to axe its famous and important art museum and replace it with what they describe as a mixed-use space. UCL's collection comprises of some 10,000 artworks, including those from the Slade School of Fine Art. Birmingham Museum and Art Gallery, home to one of the greatest pre-Raphaelite collections, has just partially reopened after a 4-year closure. The vast majority of its collection, including works by Rubens, Canaletto, Hogarth, Holman Hunt and Burne-Jones, is absent, and there are no firm plans, as far as we can gather, to reopen the whole museum with its entire collection for many years to come at least. So these are just two very worrying and high-profile examples of what's happening in the museum world, and we will return to this issue really soon. However, we're always on the lookout for green shoots in the arts, novel approaches, people bucking trends and bravely doing their own things. So when regular contributor Professor Kevin Yuill told us about an exciting new gallery project in Bishop Auckland, we naturally asked him to find out more and see if he could persuade founder Jonathan Ruffer to tell us all about the project in his own words. And we were thrilled that Jonathan kindly agreed. So without further ado, here's Kevin's conversation with Jonathan Ruffer, founder of the Spanish Gallery. We hope you enjoy it.
After living for more than 20 years in the northeast of England, I thought I'd seen all of the worthwhile art in the area. I thought that I had exhausted the culture of the whole region, in fact. Bishop Auckland was hardly high on my list. Bishop Auckland is a town in the northeast of England in County Durham, which had had its glory days in the 19th century and was very dependent on the mines. And in 2019, The Guardian referred to Bishop Auckland as a, quote, rundown town since the closure of the mines. That gives you some flavor of what I was expecting. In 2012, Jonathan Ruffer, an investment banker in the City of London, a self-described city slicker, purchased Auckland Castle, the former seat of the once powerful bishops of Durham. One of his many projects in the region is the Spanish Gallery. It has flown somewhat under the radar since opening, dismissed in a review in The Guardian, but hardly discussed outside the region beyond that. So it was with a little trepidation that I went to the gallery in August 2024. Not only was I pleasantly surprised, I was hugely impressed. The gallery concentrates upon the art from what is called the Golden Age of Spanish art, from 1530 to 1700, roundabout. It includes pictures by Francesco de Zubarán, which had been hanging in Auckland Castle since 1756, of El Greco, and of Giuseppe de Ribera, to name a few. One of the things I learned about in the gallery was Juan Bautista Magno, not a household name, and I'm probably murdering it as it happens, my pronunciation, but incredibly important, according to Ruffer. He feels that it bridged a gap between Caravaggio and the Spanish. Caravaggio had revolutionized painting, and in Spain, Juan Bautista Magno is an important link. The gallery is beautifully laid out and uses the latest technology to recreate pieces that it simply does not have. You can stand on a simulacrum of a terracotta floor in Seville, surrounded by glistening reproductions of Moorish tiles from the palace where young Velázquez had art lessons. I was very curious about the man who dreamt up putting such wonderful art in this gallery in what even those who live in Bishop Auckland and love it agree is an obscure part of the world. What had inspired Mr. Ruffer to do so? He very generously agreed to be interviewed about it, and what follows is my interview with him.
I'm delighted to be interviewing Jonathan Ruffer, who has played a key role in the development of the Spanish Gallery, part of the superb Bishop Auckland project. My first question is can you start by saying a little bit about the Spanish Gallery and your role in its development?
I came up to Bishop Auckland about 13 or 14 years ago and had the specific desire to see whether it was possible with love and money to transform a town that was out to the count into something that was as good as it could possibly be. And nobody's really tried that before, so I had no idea quite what that would mean when it was at home. And the Spanish Gallery is merely one of the branches of the tree that grew out of that source.
So it could have been something other than art. Or was it very specifically?
I'm very gaudy, and I made a tactical error of going on 8-day silent retreat to a rather leaky seminary in North Wales. And I got cornered on day 2. What I was confronted with was giving up what I was doing in the city and working with the dispossessed. And I really hadn't seen this coming at all. But always when you're confronted with something startling, you need to respond quickly. So you have to say yes, or I'll consider it, which is another way of saying no. So when I came back from that, I come from the northeast, so it seemed an obvious place to...
Oh, you do? So where are you from?
Well, I was brought up just south of Middlesbrough. My dad was a Royal Marine who did Arctic convoys during the war. And my mum lived in Newcastle, and my father's ship had been beaten up and it was being repaired in Newcastle. And she was a rep with women's naval bit. I was
You're the outcome
of that military encounter.
So you do have roots just around the northeast.
Well, that's where I come from. That's who I am.
But Bishop Auckland, probably you could have looked at several towns.
I did. I said to the city I'd give it 2 years and then switch over. And the question was, where would one go and what would one do? I always felt it was going to be in County Durham because Northumberland has a character and North Yorkshire has a character, but County Durham has lost the sense of who it is. If you look at how nations are, you quite often find that there is a cultural capital and a commercial capital. So you have Edinburgh and Glasgow, and in the old days, London and Birmingham, Sydney and Melbourne, Cape Town and Johannesburg. And I think that the way to understand a balanced County Durham is to see that Durham City is capital of culture, and that Bishop Auckland grew up as the commercial capital. So if you look at the history of Bishop Auckland, it's banks, solicitors, accountants, promoters, the railway.
I've been very impressed by the transport that existed and the huge amount of industry in the Northeast since I've been here, but very 19th century, early 20th century, and then a sort of slow decline, which is good. But
well, Hemingway once said, how do you go bankrupt? And the answer is gradually and then suddenly. And that's pretty much what happened to Bishop Auckland. It peaked after the First World War. So we became like the Appalachians, like East Germany. Really, it's a great issue. What happens to communities when the whole point of the creation of the community has disappeared? And that was the challenge. is to see whether something could be created here which would allow for a resurrection of the community. And I'm not interested in the town, I'm interested in people. So when I was looking around, the church commissioners controlled the palace at Auckland, and they were trying to sell the Zurbarán pictures, which had been there since the 1750s. So it seemed to me that was a really powerful way of putting a flag up the flagpole to a community and saying, no idea what I'm going to do, no idea what I'm going to do with the pictures, but be assured that I'm coming here to help you. So that was the dynamic. Neil McGregor of the British Museum was really behind this and interested in it. And he said, look, if you're serious about a long-term work, you've got to control the built heritage. Sooner or later, if you did, the thing will run out of steam. But if you control the key buildings, which are deeply loved, even if the communities don't really understand the nature of the affection they feel for it, then you'll be carried through difficult times.
You managed, and it's done an excellent job. I have been coming here for a while, and you can see the improvements. You can feel.
Oh, that's brilliant.
I come in, and I think it's got a bit of a vibe, this place, to it now that it didn't have in the past. We came up in 2000. There are noticeable improvements in Bishop Auckland in particular, and other places not. And that's how you can tell that there's something going on. So I have to say that I was hugely impressed with the Spanish Gallery. Beyond the magnificent, really heart-stopping paintings, which are just stunning and unexpected because, let's face it, that's a bank in Bishop Auckland. And you walk through the door and you are transported, which was hugely impressive. The settings were very well done. The focus on the chronological period I also thought was excellent. Just in that we're not doing too much here. We're not doing a theme throughout history, which historians hate. And the notes accompanying the paintings made it sound like you were giving a guide and to a private collection, which I really enjoyed. And the final thing is the use of innovation in terms of the top floor, and the reproductions are astounding what people can do these days. How much, and please don't be overly modest, are you responsible for that?
Well, the Spanish Gallery, pretty much wholly. I'm not a designer, but I knew that I wanted to tell a story. And the story of the Spanish Golden Age, it's the story for Bishop Auckland, because Spain at the beginning of the 17th century was preoccupied with the idea of eternity. But wherever they looked, they saw transience. And it was what produced the Spanish Golden Age was the ability to express both realities in the same image. There was a mystic called St. John of the Cross who'd been writing about 70 years earlier, and he said there are two realities. The realities, Kevin, and you and I are sitting here chatting away, but there are also the thoughts that are going on within us. But those questions that are not easily answered do sit alongside just the quotidian things of life. And that is what I think, for a generation and a half, the Spanish pulled off. And so you're seeing things that are absolutely like nothing else. And when they learned how to do it, it became rechauffage, and the genius passed away, and you were just left with competence. Well, competent painting is boring painting.
And you were a collector before you established the Spanish Gallery, so you had an interest in that period of Spain well before.
I was interested in Baroque pictures and the Renaissance, which peaked in about 1520, and there was an absolute failure of nerve because people felt that they had achieved perfection. And there was a period which is now known as mannerism, but it basically was a tentative way of overtelling stories. And so the whole thing becomes twee in some cases, ridiculous in others. And then Caravaggio came in, and he painted the Dormition, the death of Mary, mother of Jesus. And he took as the model for Mary a prostitute that had been pulled out of the Tiber. And people were both fascinated and appalled at the idea that the mother of the Son of God could be represented by something so appallingly low life. And it creates turmoil. And if you look at the picture over there, that is the work of a very ordinary French painter, but he happened to be in Rome just at the time when Caravaggio died. And in that 5 years that followed, ordinary painters painted things, that is a fantastic picture. So when you're confronted with something that is beyond you, it can take you beyond yourself. And I think that's the history of the Spanish Golden Age. You're looking at painters who were just simply not allowed to be ordinary.
Which of the artworks that you brought to Bishop Auckland's are you most proud of?
I really don't do proud, and I'm also by nature an investor. And as an investor, what you're always looking for is something that nobody else has seen. And what I've never been awfully good at is whinnying at everybody's favourites. Well, we all know Velázquez is a terrific painter, and it happens that we've got a Velázquez, but I don't find myself thinking, wow, aren't I marvellous, I've got a Velázquez, because Velázquez, everybody has been given permission to admire him. What I want to do is to find those artists that are not household names, but nevertheless have skills that if they were up to sustaining that reputation. And so there's a painter called Maino, and I've got 3 Mainos in there. There's a painter called Francisco Corrientes, all pictures commissioned by the royal family. We've got 4 of them. A chap called Cabazzanaro. He made the mistake of dropping down dead when he was rather young, so he didn't do much. But, they're stunning pictures. Nowhere else in the world can you find this sort of quality. And I only talk about this sort of quality only because the names are not recognizably famous.
I did not know many of them, but when I walk through a gallery, I first go and just look at the visual. And if it looks to me interesting, I will immediately go over and find out about it. And I did that in the Spanish gallery several times.
What did you learn, Kevin?
You'll have to forgive me. I have a blank spot for names. It's a very bare painting with a cross, and it's a different perspective on the cross. Maybe it was John Singer Sargent.
Yes.
It just struck me that there was more to John Singer Sargent than Whistler's Mother, which is, of course, and a few others, which are very celebrated.
Sargent, as a young man, went into the Prado and was blown away by all the stuff. And so this is the premiere pensée. That was the moment when he went off and he thought, I can express myself in paint. My mind is throbbing with what I've seen there. And that work is an astonishing one.
Yes, it added another dimension to a painter I thought I knew a little bit about.
Isn't that why art has the power of changing us? Because it gives us connections that are so far beyond ourselves that we can't hang on to the side of the boat.
Yes, I think that's a good way of expressing it. I particularly enjoyed your notes, which were me to like a collector and a knowledgeable guy, just giving you a tour, just saying, but there's a pressure these days to do apologies for various different things that happened in the past. So if you go to Dutch galleries, which I lived in the Netherlands for 6 months and just went to every single gallery I could, and it's a fantastic place. Whenever there was slavery represented, there'd be a little note saying
bad.
Yeah, exactly. Do you get pressure to do that? And what is your attitude? Because you work with the people who are curators. They've been trained curators.
Yeah.
During their training, as a historian, I know, because I used to work with these people, there is a great pressure to do this great apologizing for history, which...
Well, apologizing for history is unhistorical. If one is a historian in the way that one's fingertips can buzz, then it's not so much a hiding of things. It is a scrubbing clean of things. So it doesn't mean that a story will always be upbeat, because many things were painted for self-glorification. So something that can look very pious. Actually, all he's doing is basically saying to his friends, look at the company I keep. Well, that seems to me to be something that nobody would do today, but the attitude is still absolutely prevalent.
So you don't feel you should warn visitors about the sites. You just think that art should be appreciated as it is. Is it didactic, though?
Well, it's a good question. We have a faith museum here, and I assumed before we opened it, I could see the militant atheists attacking us for being gaudy. And actually what's happened is that it has been vocally and universally praised. And the reason for it is because we have gone out of our way not to be didactic.
It's true. I worried about the Faith Museum because I thought, I hope it's not too defensive. But I thought it was a very good mix. And particularly I can't remember the name, the huge flame, the M. That was awe-inspiring. And I quite like that because that's what, to me, faith should be. Yeah. That's what it should inspire awe. It should make you feel there are bigger things than me.
The last room of all, what we're going to do, we're commissioning a work from the Royal Academy of Music, which will be a 10-minute piece in the key of A, played on the oboe. Now, why should that be relevant? It's a fragile instrument, and it is extremely difficult to tune. So if you can't tune it, tune everything else off it. Now, that seems to me to be as good a picture of God as you could want, that he's fragile, he's easily forgotten about, and yet he controls everything.
Okay, a couple of other questions that I've got. One related to that, in fact. You seem dedicated to the democratic view of art. I think, in your words, cultural beauty is democratic. But yet, some might say, well, this is elitist as well. And there's a sort of juxtaposition. Do you see that as problematic?
Well, no, I see it as the idea that it's elitist is actually, but it doesn't seem that way, because if you live a sophisticated metropolitan life, you get brownie points for being culturally aware, so that you train yourself in these things. But if you've seen the dull faces, the dull eyes, with people walking around the premiere of a new National Gallery exhibition, what you know is that they're doing it because that's what you do. And Jane opened the door to a guy who was bringing a parcel. He saw this, and he was simply transfixed by it. That's what I mean about democratic. This was a guy who was, he was a lorry driver. He had no training, but he just saw that, and something in that made him simply stop in his tracks.
Spoke to him, yes.
Now that, to me, is the innate power of beauty, reaching across the boring, educated, I think this will look good on my CV, to the person who could receive it.
I completely agree, because there is this notion that art should be for certain people and not for other people. And of course, all art should be for all people. And I mean, that's one of the reasons I like being here, is that there is, I think, at least an appreciation that culture is valuable. Whereas sometimes I don't get that impression. I wanted to ask a difficult question, which is about faith in art and what you have been doing. As somebody with no faith, I am still drawn towards music, and music is more my métier. I've sung in a choir, in fact, just across the road, just in the chapel there. And so I'm a great appreciator of James Macmillan. I don't know what you know.
Great man.
Yes. Yeah. But I think his faith inspires him. One thing that I'm interested in is that you were very good at what you did originally. You were very successful, and you could have done anything. And yet you've given quite a portion of your life to service. You are serving this community by bringing here, and you've put huge amounts of money into this, and you didn't need to. Is that a fair summation, that you've decided? And I suppose I have an interest in this as well, is because for the first time in my life, I wasn't worried about money. And I found myself thinking, well, I don't need that new car that I've been dreaming of. I don't need that. And I thought, what do I want to do? What should I do? Which has led me to a sort of service-oriented life. Is that the case with you as well? Is that you just got to the stage where you thought, I have what I need?
I'm nervous of power. And it seems to me that money is a particularly dangerous one. Because of living in the city, I rub shoulders with really a number of billionaires, and some of them are multi-billionaires. And having more money than you need is rather like aging, that nobody is physically more attractive as they get older. And some people get fat and some people get wrinkly, and there are all the different ways you can get old, but they're all variants on a degradation. Now, it seems to me that's what's happened with money. And so my thought, I mean, what happened to me was I'd had a very good period in 2008 in the investment world, and we had a couple of billion under management. And suddenly I could see that I was going to become not at the point of, gosh, well, is the house that I want to live in big enough? Have I got enough to educate the children? And there, money is simply the means to doing what you want to do. But once you've got 600 million, you're thinking, well, why do I have to lower my eyelids at the billionaires? If I could make another 400, and the whole thing has become unreal. And I couldn't see an escape from that except for getting rid of it. And one of the things that I rather rise over is people who think that I've been generous, because I've done this not out of love, I've done it out of fear. I think of myself as a drain pipe. What comes in the top end goes running down the drain pipe and at the bottom end.
I think that's also a good metaphor. Have you ever heard, do you know Feuerbach? He has a great idea, which is to say that the difference between me and Christians is that Christians say God made man in his own image, and I say man made God in his own image. And it's a reflection of the greatness of humanity, which is, that's not Richard Dawkins style atheism. But that's more where I come from. I go into a church and I think this is stunning that people were inspired to do this. Yeah. I have a huge respect because, of course, God inspired them. Yeah. The idea of God inspired them. So, very last question. How has the town and the region responded to the whole Bishop Auckland project? Because, as I say, I did see some people being very wary of, why is this man come in here with his money bags and done this and that and the other thing? And other people were, of course, very welcoming.
It's a fascinating question, and I haven't been asked it before, but this is how I think of it. When we came here, a great many people fell on their knees and called me St. Jonathan, and other people would, on the other side of the street, would cross over, come up to me and say, push off. We really don't want you here. Who you are, what you're doing, just leave. And then there were the rest who didn't really give much of a thought to it. Now, both constituencies, which I regard, I'm actually much fonder of the people who tick one off because there's a reality there. There are fewer St. Jonathans and there are fewer push-offs. And if I had to measure effectiveness, I would add those two fors and against together and say they represent unreality. And therefore, to the extent that you can diminish that constituency, the more it means that whatever else we are, what we're doing is a reality. And that seems to me to be the key to it.
Yes. As you say, there's something good about that in people being wary. I don't think that's a bad thing. But I think most people are now convinced. The only critical thing that I would say is the price of admission at the Spanish Gallery rather prevents many people from coming.
Have a guess how much the costing, if you add up what it does to run and you don't value the pictures at anything, have a guess at how much each visitor costs.
I would guess that it's more than the price of admission.
It's £60 per person.
£60 per person. Okay. Yes, that does set it into some sort of context.
Reflecting on the gallery and the person of Mr. Jonathan Ruffer, I was impressed by several aspects of both the gallery and Ruffer. As I said in the interview, I very much felt, in terms of the notes that accompanied the paintings, like he was there to guide and point out what had originally impressed him about the painting in question. And he was not telling us what to feel, but simply pointing out what actually affected him. And I thought that was a very good touch. I feel as if the gallery concentrates on the art itself for its own sake, rather than anachronistically using it to hector visitors about slavery or other dark aspects of the time. Ruffer simply concentrates on one era rather than on these gimmicky themes. That's not to say that it's without themes. There is a sort of theme of rotting fruit and vegetables that seems to reflect in a fairly, well, a little bit clunky metaphor, shall we say, to the Habsburg empires and its troubles happening during this time. However, having said that, I think what I found most inspiring about Ruffer and his gallery is its democratic perspective. The gallery and the art, and Ruffer himself, do not talk down to visitors, but seek to excite them about the visual experience, about the insights that this art gives, not only to Spain in the artistic golden age, but to our common human bond with people from a very different time and place. Ruffer seems to believe that all people can and should appreciate art. Good on it.
Thanks for listening to Arts First. You can subscribe and listen to all our episodes at our Substack, that's at artsfirst.uk, or you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or our YouTube channel. If you want to give us a like or review us on any of those channels, then that would be a great help. And if you'd like to help with a donation, then please see our Substack donations page. We'll see you next time.